And what is up, everyone? Welcome back to the show, Historic Hot Laps. Got a pretty packed race recap for you this week. Racing gave us a little bit of everything this last week. We had IndyCar out west, Portland International Raceway. Alex Palou continued to become a remarkably dominant driver this season. No surprise there. Then we had to Iowa, talk about some NASCAR stuff. We had USAC Silver Crown involved in that. Let's get into it. All right, let's start out west with IndyCar. So the series came back from its break and kicked off a stretch of 6 races in just 5 weeks at Portland International Raceway. If you're going to start a stretch like that, Portland is a pretty good place to do it because this place has a reputation for biting drivers. The 1.9, almost 2-mile course has long, fast sections. You can really attack there. But then you got turns 1 and 2, better known as Calamity Corner, waiting to punish anybody who just gets a little too ambitious. And we saw that happen throughout the weekend. Pato O'Ward, Renus VK, and Scott Dixon, they all found trouble at different points during the weekend when practice and qualifying. Graham Rahal brought out the first race caution after finding the barrier on lap 7. When the dust settled, there's one familiar name standing at the top, and that's Alex Palou. Palou starting second alongside pole sitter Felix Rosenqvist, and although he didn't lead every single lap, this was one of those races where Palou seems to slowly squeeze the life out of the competition. I mean, the first pit cycle was where things really began to swing in his favor. By lap 38, Palou had taken control of the race. He opened up a 3-second advantage over Rosenqvist. Another pit cycle came and went. Same story again, Palou out front, Rosenqvist chasing. And as the laps wound down, the gap only continued to grow. With 20 laps remaining, Palou had about 4 seconds in hand. And with 7 to go, it was 6 seconds, just kept growing, right? And from there, it was simply a matter of just bringing it home. Alex Palou wins the Only Bowls Grand Prix of Portland. Felix Rosenqvist comes up in second, followed by Will Power, Renus VK, and Kyle Kirkwood. Scotty Mack in 7th, Newgarden in 8th, Christian Lundgaard in 9th. Kevin Simpson rounded out the top 10. Pato O'Ward finished 11th, while Scott Dixon came home in 14th. So here's the bigger story on this. This was Palou's 6th victory of this season of 2026, 25th of his IndyCar career. More importantly, he extended his championship lead to 110 points over David Malukas. At this point, we're not just talking about a driver having a good season. He's doing the same thing once again. We're watching a championship campaign starting to look historic. And there's just an interesting wrinkle here, though, is Palou hadn't exactly been unbeatable on road courses recently. So for him to come into Portland, execute this strategy, build the gap, and drive away from a pole-winning Rosenqvist makes this win feel a little more significant, right, than just another check in the win column. Because this is what separates championship seasons from good seasons. And when you're not necessarily at your absolute best, you still find a way to win. So Palou's doing that over and over again. I mean, there are a couple other little stories we can keep an eye on from Portland, right? Felix Rosenqvist deserves a lot of credit. He put that MSR car on pole and then brought it home in second. So Will Power finishing third is huge, considering Power had won the previous 2 Portland races with Team Penske. It was another strong performance at the track where he'd clearly been comfortable forever. And Renus VK quietly put together a very impressive 4th place finish. Will Power is a big story right now because he clearly was finding his groove. I think had he not had such a gap on the track position, he probably would have been able to go even higher. I don't know if he had what it would take to get Palou, but he definitely gave it his all. Another sad story is Armstrong's MSR entry, that number 66, suffered another engine-related retirement. And this isn't an isolated incident because Portland is the 3rd race in the last 4 where Armstrong was forced out for an engine issue. So they've really got something to figure out there. Considering what happened at Road America earlier this year, where Armstrong was in the position to potentially score his first IndyCar victory before an engine failure ended that opportunity, we're talking a handful since then. You can understand why it's becoming such a frustrating storyline for them in that team. I mean, it brings us to the larger picture, right? Like Portland wasn't necessarily a race that produced a massive amount of late race drama. Instead, you had Palou dominate, other cars fail. I mean, pretty much standard IndyCar this season at this point, right? Alex Palou, though, man, he lets the race come to him. He executes great pit strategies when it's called, and then he disappeared. 6 wins, 25 career wins, 110-point championship advantage. At this point, everybody else is just racing each other. They're trying to figure out how to stop him, but I don't know. I don't know if it can be done. While IndyCar is busy showing us what happens on a road course, let's jump over to NASCAR, who's in a whole different direction because we're talking about Iowa, the 7/8 of a mile oval, high speed, short track racing, tight corners, heavy braking zones, absolutely no room for mistakes. Iowa gave us not one, not two, but three very different races over the weekend. So let's talk about the O'Reilly Series race first, right? The NASCAR feeder series, if you will. This one was particularly chaotic. Saturday's afternoon, Hy-Vee Perks 250 looked like it was going to be a potential Ross Chastain victory. Chastain was in position late. It appeared to have a race under control, but then Iowa did what Iowa does. It threw a wrench into everything because Carson Kvapil, who had just earned his first career O'Reilly Series victory at Indy, suddenly found himself in position to do something even more impressive, and that's win two straight races. The race went into overtime, and on the first overtime restart, Kvapil grabbed the lead from Chastain. Then another caution came out. 8 cars were collected in a crash in turn 2. Suddenly, the race was going into second overtime. That's when Kvapil could keep it in his head. The final restart came. He had Rajah using the top lane to make a change, but Kvapil held him off. The margin, just 0.3 seconds. Carson Kvapil wins again, Rajah Caruth second, William Swalch third, Ross Chastain fourth, and Sheldon Creed in fifth. This wasn't just a good weekend for Kvapil, though. This is starting to look like a legitimate momentum shift for him. I mean, he went winless through his first 63 O'Reilly Series starts, and now he's won 2 races in a row. And he's heading into the regular season finale, second in the championship standings, with a 28-point cushion over Sheldon Creed. That's a pretty remarkable turnaround. There's another statistic here I really like, and that's with Kvapil, Caruth, and Chastain fighting for the top 4. JR Motorsports extended its streak to 80 consecutive races with at least one car finishing in the top 10. That's not just a hot streak. That is organizational consistency. The championship battle isn't over yet. I mean, the final 2 chase eligible positions getting extremely interesting with Brent Cruz, William Swalch, Taylor Gray, Rajah, and they're all battling for the cutoff spot, right? So while Kvapil suddenly became one of the favorites, there are plenty of drivers still fighting this postseason. And then let's go to Saturday night. Iowa Speedway got a completely different kind of open wheel racing because I feel like race cars with big horsepower, minimal aero, and a little bit of history baked in every single lap. This is what we're talking about. This is one of our favorite things to discuss. The USAC Silver Crown Series. They returned to Iowa Speedway for the first time in 11 years. This is exactly the kind of race that fits this show so well because while NASCAR's putting on a show that day, Silver Crown brought a very different chapter of American racing history. The Iowa 100 was 100 laps around the 7/8 mile Iowa Speedway. Cabre started on pole and led 46 laps, but CJ Leary was coming. Leary started 5th. He moved to 4th on the opening lap, 3rd on lap 2, 2nd by lap 24. I mean, making ground this whole time, right? And then on lap 47, the opportunity arrived. Chase's engine shut off with what appeared to be an ignition problem, and just like that, CJ Leary inherited the lead. But he didn't simply inherit the victory, he definitely earned it. He led 54 laps, went on to win the Iowa 100, his first ever visit to the Speedway. Think about that for just a second. First visit to the track, first Silver Crown race at Iowa in more than a decade. He starts 5th. He moves through the field, takes the lead, and then runs the final 54 laps out front. That's one heck of a first impression on a track, right? Mario Clauser finished 2nd, just 0.8 seconds behind Leary. Justin Grant was 3rd. Nathan Bird finished 4th in that one, and Greg Corey rounded out the top 5, charging all the way from 15th positions. That earned Corey the Hard Charger Award. And CJ Leary's championship picture just got even stronger. The victory increased his USAC Silver Crown points lead from 36 to 45. He's now finished on the podium in all 6 of his starts this season. He's carrying a streak of 12 consecutive top 5 finishes in the Silver Crown Series, so dating back to last year's season, 2025. Here's another cool piece of history in the race, though, because Nathan Bird became the first driver since J.J. Yealy in 2007 to compete in both the USAC Silver Crown race and the NASCAR O'Reilly Series race on the same day at the same track. Bird finished 4th in the Silver Crown race and went out to finish 25th in the O'Reilly race. That's the kind of thing that makes the weekend like this a little more special because you're not just watching 2 different racing series, you're watching a different generation of drivers and styles of American racing sharing the same piece of asphalt, the same track. That's exactly the kind of thing we love here at Historic Hot Laps. So now, Saturday night, Iowa had already given us 2 overtime NASCAR finish, a back-to-back O'Reilly Series winner, the return of Silver Crown after 11 years, a first-time Iowa winner in CJ Leary, and a championship battle getting tighter. So let's talk about Sunday afternoon when the Cup Series showed up. Saturday was wild. Sunday was downright brutal. Ryan Blaney started on the pole, and for 70 laps, it looked like this might be his race. Blaney led every one of those first 70 laps and won stage one. Joey Logano second, Kyle Larson third. But Iowa wasn't interested in making things easy. The first major incident came out almost immediately on lap 4. Tyler Reddick got loose entering turn 1 and collected Eric Jones. Both cars slammed to the outside wall, both done. Reddick finished 36th, Jones 35th. And for Jones, this was especially painful because he entered the race just 44 points outside that final chase position. Now he's got an even steeper hill to climb with only 3 regular season races remaining. And that's when we get another major storyline. Kyle Larson. Larson was running near the front. A 4-wide situation developed involving Larson, Alex Bowman, his teammate, Ryan Prix, and Riley Herbst. John Hunter Nemechek pushed Larson high through turns 3 and 4. Things tightened up, and suddenly 4 cars were trying to occupy the same piece of Iowa Speedway, and they just couldn't. Larson suffered damage. Bowman suffered even more. Bowman went to the garage. Larson eventually returned, but finished 33rd with being 18 laps down. For championship caliber driver, that's a massive points hit, and they're champion from last year, right? But while all of that was happening behind them, the Toyota camp was quietly setting up what would become the story of the afternoon. Christopher Bell ends up taking stage 2, and Ty Gibbs, he had already survived his own problem. After finishing 4th in stage 1, Gibbs dropped all the way back to 28th during the pit sequence because of an issue changing the right rear tire. But instead of letting that sink him, Gibbs worked his way back up towards the front, and that's where the race really became interesting because in the final 60 laps, you had Ryan Blaney, who had led 129 laps. Christopher Bell had been strong all afternoon. Denny Hamlin was fighting through brake issues after starting at the rear, and then came the critical pit cycle, lap 290. Ty Gibbs comes to pit road, and his crew chief Tyler Allen makes the call. 2 tires, not 4, just 2. Bell takes 4. Suddenly, Gibbs has the jump on his teammate on pit road. That decision put Gibbs in position to win the race at the end of this because after the green flag stop cycled through, Gibbs found himself at the front with Bell right behind him, 20 laps to go. Bell had a chance. He tried the high line. He tried the bottom. He got close to the bumper. He tried to pressure Gibbs into making a mistake. I mean, it was true driving passion going on there. But Gibbs wouldn't give him one single inch. And that, to me, is the story of this race. Not the 2 tires, not the pit stop, not even the fact that 2 JGR teammates were fighting for the win. It was the composure that Ty Gibbs had. He was slipping around. Christopher Bell knew it. Everybody watching knew it, but Gibbs never made the mistake Bell wanted him to make. And then when the checkered flag came out, Ty Gibbs wins at Iowa. That's the headline. Christopher Bell finished 2nd, Ryan Blaney 3rd, Josh Berry in 4th, which was a great first top 5 of the season for him. And Denny Hamlin, despite starting at the rear and dealing with brake problems all day, finished 5th, which is crazy. Then came the quote of the day from Bell. He called it a bad second place finish. And honestly, that tells you everything you need to know about how close this race really was. Bell knew he had it in the car. He just couldn't find a way around his teammate. And while Ty Gibbs was celebrating his 2nd victory of the season, Denny Hamlin was quietly having one of the most impressive drives of the weekend from starting in the rear, dealing with brake problems, and still finishing 5th. That allows Hamlin to extend his championship lead to 103 points over Gibbs, who jumped from 4th to 2nd in the standings. So now the championship picture is really getting interesting. Hamlin still has the points advantage. Gibbs is surging. Bell keeps finishing 2nd and piling up points. Then you've got guys like Tyler Reddick, Kyle Larson, and others who simply cannot afford many more bad weekends in the regular season. I mean, we've got 3 races left. The chase is getting real. And Iowa definitely delivered one of those weekends where a single mistake could affect your entire championship outlook. So let's step back and look at what we just talked about for a second. In Portland, Alex Palou reminding everybody why he's the man of beating IndyCar. 6 wins on this season, I might add, and 110-point advantage, right? At Iowa, Carson Kvapil suddenly looks completely different after winning 2 straight O'Reilly Series races. USAC Silver Crown returns, gave us fantastic throwback with CJ Leary winning the Iowa 100 in his first visit to that track. Then NASCAR gave us one of the most interesting short track finishes we've seen this season, where Ty Gibbs pulling it out over Christopher Bell. 4 races, 4 completely different flavors of racing. And that's what makes this weekend like this so much fun, right? You've got IndyCar showing us precision strategy on road course. You've got NASCAR showing us what happens when 40 cars are fighting for every inch of the short oval. USAC Silver Crown reminding us of the roots of American open wheel racing. It's very much still alive. Hands down, my favorite cars out there. Best favorite open wheel for sure. And honestly, that's why we love this stuff, right? Because whether it's modern IndyCar slicing around Portland, Cup car sliding in Iowa, Silver Crown screaming around the same track, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still the same thing. Drivers pushing machines to the edge, sometimes finding out exactly what that edge might be, and that's your weekend recap. Simple as that at Historic Hot Laps. So before we move on, if you're enjoying the show, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Whether you're watching us here on YouTube, listening to your favorite podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it may be, or you're following us on social media with the shorts that we put out, every subscription, every like, every comment, every share helps us grow, right? We know this world lives on that. And we really appreciate everyone who's been along for the ride. It seems like every week we gain one or two, and that's just fantastic. It's awesome. Thank you all for that. We've got a lot more coming, more recaps, more history, more guests, hopefully a few more stories from inside the world of racing that you won't hear anywhere else. Make sure you're subscribed. Drop us a comment and let us know what you thought about this weekend on this episode. And while we're talking about keeping the engines running, got to give a quick shout out here to our friends at W Energy. If you're looking for something to keep you going through a long race weekend, a late night gaming session, or just one of those days where you need a little extra fuel, check out W, because W Energy is a zero sugar, gluten-free, no filler, no artificial colors or dyes, secret formulas or hidden ingredients. I mean, this stuff is just straight up delicious without any of the nonsense. And one of the things we really like is that their flavors aren't just the same old thing with a different label slapped on it like you get at a lot of these canned energy drink suppliers, right? They make their own unique flavors, so there's something different to try. Plus, you're looking at about $1 or less per drink, which can be pretty big savings compared to grabbing a coffee or an energy drink next time you need a boost from the gas station, whatever it may be. And they're also made right here in the USA. So if you want to give W a try, head over to their website and use promo code HOTLAPS at checkout. That'll get you 10% off your order. And also lets W know that you found them through the show. Go check them out. Use HOTLAPS for 10% off. Tell them we sent you. Once again, thank you for watching, listening, subscribing, sharing, and being part of our community over here at Historic Hot Laps. Now, let's get back to some racing. All right. Since it's Iowa weekend, we figured it'd be a good time to talk about the history of Iowa. So when you hear the words Iowa Speedway, there's a pretty good chance that NASCAR is the first thing that comes to mind, and honestly, super understandable. NASCAR Cup Series has now raced here for 3 seasons. Ryan Blaney won the inaugural Cup race in 2024. We've got the O'Reilly Series here. We've got ARCA, and the Cup Series has turned Iowa into one of the stops that gets a lot of national attention. But here's the thing. Iowa Speedway was never just a NASCAR track. In fact, before NASCAR Cup car ever turned a competitive lap around this place, Iowa Speedway had already established itself as one of the most interesting short ovals in American racing. IndyCars raced here, USAC raced here, ARCA raced here, NASCAR's Xfinity and Truck Series raced here. Some of the biggest names in American motorsports have built a pretty impressive resume around the 7/8 mile oval. So this week, after watching USAC return to Iowa for the first time in 11 years, we thought it was a good time to look back at the history of Iowa, because Iowa Speedway has a story that goes well beyond NASCAR. So let's go back to the very beginning. Let's go back to 2005. The idea was to build a major motorsports facility in Newton, Iowa. Construction officially began on June 21st, 2005. The person who played a major role in this designing the track was somebody racing fans should immediately recognize, Mr. Rusty Wallace, NASCAR champion, future Hall of Famer. He helped design the layout. And Wallace wasn't trying to build another giant 1.5 mile cookie cutter NASCAR track. Instead, the goal was something different, a short oval that's usable, right? A track that would reward drivers who could actually drive. The result, 7/8 mile progressively banked D-shaped oval. The banking ranges from relatively mild on the front and back stretches to substantially more banking in the corners. And the progressive banking is important because it gives the drivers multiple lines to work with. It's one of the reasons the track can be so difficult to master. The track was completed in September of 2006. And Iowa Speedway officially opened its doors September 15th of that year. The first race at the facility was won by Woody Howard, and almost immediately the track showed one of the characteristics that would become part of the identity, and that's tire wear. The opening event actually had to use competition cautions because of excessive tire wear. So, right from the beginning, Iowa was telling drivers, you aren't just going to drive around here, you're going to have to manage your car, you have to manage your tires. And that would become one of the defining characteristics of this place. And this is where the story gets a little interesting. Let's talk about 2007 because Iowa Speedway didn't have to wait long before attracting one of the biggest forms of racing in America, and that is the IndyCar series. The first IndyCar race at Iowa was held in 2000. And the first winner, none other than Dario Franchitti. Think about that for just 1 second. The first major IndyCar race, the brand new Iowa track, was won by a future Indy 500 winner and a future 4-time IndyCar champion. Not a bad way to start the history of the track, but the inaugural race was a brutal one. It was an attrition race. There were crashes, cars were destroyed, drivers were laps down. Scott Dixon, who would go on to become one of the greatest drivers in IndyCar history, finished 10th and 77 laps behind Franchitti. That's how difficult this first race was, and yet IndyCar saw something in Iowa because the series kept coming back. Now, 2008 to 2011, Iowa becomes an IndyCar track. You got Dario Franchitti winning again in 2009. Dan Weldon won it in 2008. Tony Kanaan won it in 2010, and Marco Andretti won it in 2011, I believe. That list alone tells you something about the Iowa Speedway. These weren't random winners, right? These were some of the biggest names in IndyCar, and the track was developing its own personality. It wasn't a super speedway. It wasn't a traditional half-mile short track. It wasn't a traditional anything, really. It was a strange middle ground track, fast enough that the cars were carrying some enormous speeds, but short enough that the corners came at you almost constantly. And because of the progressive banking, drivers could move around the track and try different lines. That made Iowa one of those places where setup mattered enormously. You could have a car that was fantastic in qualifying, completely miserable over a long run, and if you couldn't manage your tires, you were going to move backwards. So let's talk about NASCAR arriving. Now, while IndyCar was establishing Iowa as a good open wheel destination, in 2009, Iowa Speedway began hosting NASCAR's national touring season, including what they then called the Nationwide Series, Busch Series. Today, it's the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, along with Camping World Truck Series. And this created something pretty unique. You had NASCAR stock cars and Indy cars racing on the same 7th, 8th mile oval. They were discovering two completely different ways to attack the same piece of asphalt. Stock cars were heavy, powerful, sliding around. Indy cars were tighter, faster, much more sensitive to aerodynamic balance. Same track, completely different animals. And that's part of what makes Iowa so fascinating and makes it such a great track. I mean, as the years went by, Iowa developed another reputation. There were drivers who simply seemed to understand the place. You had Brad Keselowski becoming one of the successful NASCAR drivers at Iowa. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. won 3 consecutive Xfinity races here from 2011 to 2012. Then there was a young driver named Kyle Busch. Busch became one of the most defining drivers in Iowa Speedway's early history, winning multiple races here across the national series of NASCAR. That's another important thing in Iowa's history, as this track became a proving ground. Young drivers could come here and show what they could actually race. It wasn't simply about having the fastest car. You had to understand management. We've talked about it. We talked about tire wear. You had to understand the traffic patterns. You had to know how to run the bottom. You had to know when the top was going to come in and you could use the top lane, which isn't that often, but it does happen. And you had to be patient. And that's a good recipe for developing drivers. So let's go back to the IndyCar side of things for a couple years here, because the IndyCar side, one driver began to establish himself as the king of Iowa starting in roughly 2011, I believe. But that's Mr. Joseph Newgarden. So Newgarden had already won the Indy Lights race in Iowa in 2011. Then he started piling up IndyCar victories. He won there in 2016, again in 2019, and again in 2020. Then he returned to victory lane in 22 and 23. In fact, Newgarden eventually became the winningest IndyCar driver at Iowa Speedway, which is incredible considering the statistics and the drivers who have raced there with Dario Franchitti, Dan Weldon, Tony Kanaan, Ryan Hunter-Reay, Will Power. I mean, all these guys, plenty of IndyCar stars, but Newgarden became the guy associated with that track, as we know. But let's keep talking about it because Iowa gave us one of the more unusual IndyCar weekends in the 2020 history with the COVID-19 pandemic. The IndyCar schedule was being rebuilt, and Iowa became the site of a doubleheader. You had two IndyCar races in one weekend, both 250 laps and both under the lights. Friday night, Simon Pagenaud won. Saturday night, Justin Newgarden won. And Newgarden's victory was particularly impressive. He had led a dominant performance and completed Team Penske's sweep of the weekend. This was also Newgarden's third IndyCar victory at Iowa at this point, 2020. Yeah. And there was ever a weekend that demonstrated just how different Iowa could be from one race to the next. That was definitely it. But then came a more concerning moment in Iowa Speedway's history, and that's 2021 because Iowa Speedway disappeared from the IndyCar schedule. The NASCAR National Series also weren't racing there. The track's future became uncertain, and suddenly a facility that hosted some of America's biggest racing series was facing a very different reality. This is where the story could have ended, but it didn't. And then an important part of Iowa Speedway's history because people in Iowa fought to keep this track alive. This track found a new backing, a new direction. One of the biggest pieces of that comeback was the Hy-Vee company. That partnership helped bring IndyCar back to Iowa, and suddenly Iowa Speedway simply wasn't surviving, it was reinventing itself. IndyCar returned to Iowa in 2022. The event came back with a completely different presentation. You had big crowds, big entertainment, big sponsorship, and most importantly, big racing. Joseph Newgarden wins again. I mean, that's what he does. Then in 2023, he did something even more impressive. He swept the Iowa IndyCar weekend, two races, doubleheader, two victories, and suddenly Newgarden's relationship with the track had become legendary. But then something happened that Iowa racing fans had been waiting nearly 2 decades to see: NASCAR Cup finally arriving. So remember earlier how we said that Iowa Speedway wasn't originally simply built to be a NASCAR track? Well, in 2024, NASCAR Cup Series finally came to Iowa. It had taken 18 years since the track had opened, and it was a big deal because when Iowa Speedway opened, Cup racing was always part of the dream. Rusty Wallace, obviously the guy who could eventually host NASCAR's premier series, and in June of 2024, that dream finally happened. The first Iowa Corn 350, the first Cup race in Iowa Speedway history, and the winner, Mr. Ryan Blaney. And there was a great piece of symmetry to it because Blaney had already won at Iowa in the Truck Series, he had already won at Iowa in the Xfinity Series, and now he had won at Iowa in the Cup Series. So Ryan Blaney becomes the first driver to win Iowa Speedway in all three NASCAR National Series, and that's a pretty fitting way to begin the Cup era at Iowa. Here's where you think Iowa's story gets real interesting because 2024 wasn't just the year NASCAR Cup arrived. IndyCar was still there, and they still put on a doubleheader. Scott McLaughlin won the first race, Will Power won the second. Again, Team Penske. And the second race produced one of those moments to make you remember everything you need to watch about this racing. On the final lap, Alexander Rossi ran out of fuel. He collected Kyle Kirkwood and Stingray Robb. Robb's car went airborne, flipped upside down. Thankfully, Robb walked away, but it was another reminder that Iowa short track racing can go from calm to chaos in a heartbeat. Now, IndyCar continued racing at Iowa in 2025, and two different drivers won that year's races. You had Pato O'Ward and Alex Palou, again with the doubleheaders. It's great. It's fantastic. And that is an interesting way to close the current IndyCar chapter because after nearly 2 decades of IndyCar racing at Iowa Speedway, IndyCar didn't return this year. It's not on the schedule. They're not going there. So the 2025 races currently stand as the latest IndyCar events at that track for at least now. So let's hope they go back. Iowa's a great speedway. We wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't. Let's bring us to this weekend, though, because while NASCAR was occupying the spotlight, we're talking Silver Crown coming back to Iowa Speedway for the first time in 11 years. The last Silver Crown race was held here in 2015 and was won by Bobby Santos. And on August 8th, 2026, the series returned for the Iowa 100 laps, 30 cars, 7/8 of a mile. And suddenly the track had become something beyond NASCAR and IndyCar, once again hosting one of the most traditional forms of American open wheel racing. And I think that's pretty fitting for this weekend because Silver Car represents something different. They aren't modern Indy cars. They aren't stock cars in NASCAR. They're part of an old school American open wheel tradition. But watching them race at Iowa gives us a different direct connection between the American history of oval racing in America and the modern era, right? So past, present, future. USAC itself has sanctioned races since 1956 and has overseen more than 20,000 competitions. So when you see that Silver Crown car at Iowa Speedway, you're not just watching another support race, you're watching a piece of American racing history. And that's really what makes Iowa Speedway so interesting. I mean, you got a great timeline. 2005, start construction. 2006, we're opening the track. 2007, IndyCar starts going through it. 2008 to 2011, IndyCar establishes Iowa as a major open wheel venue. 2009, the National Series of NASCAR begins there. Iowa becomes a proving ground for NASCAR and IndyCar's biggest stars in 2010. 2016 through 2020, Joseph Newgarden building a legacy there. IndyCar runs double headers from 2020 and on, and then USAC coming back and showing up this weekend, 2026. That's pretty incredible for a track that has only been around for 20 years. I mean, they got a lot going on there. So next time somebody says Iowa Speedway, that's a NASCAR track, you can tell them not exactly. It's a track where Dario Franchitti won his first IndyCar race, track where Dan Weldon and Tony Kanaan, Marco Andretti won. Ryan Hunter-Reay became a 3-time IndyCar winner there. It's where Joseph Newgarden built one of the most dominant track-specific records in modern IndyCar history. It's where young NASCAR drivers like Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. made names for themselves, where Ryan Blaney became the first driver to win all 3 national series for NASCAR. And now it's once again a place where you can watch a USAC Silver Crown car attack the same corners that have challenged some of the greatest drivers in American racing, open wheel and stock car. And maybe it's one of the coolest thing about Iowa Speedway is it isn't defined by one series like a lot of tracks are. It's defined by a variety of racing that's taking place there. I mean, all of it, right? We're talking IndyCar, NASCAR, ARCA, USAC, young drivers, champions, veterans, open wheel cars, stock cars, all of them attacking the same piece of asphalt that is in the D-shaped 7/8 mile. So that's why Iowa Speedway deserves to be remembered as more than just a NASCAR track, because the history is really a story of American racing itself. Different cars, different generations, different racing philosophies, but one single piece of asphalt. And if you've watched racing there over the last 20 years, you've watched a pretty remarkable chapter in motorsports history unfold. And that's exactly why we want to take a lap through it here this week on Historic Hot Laps. And I like that track a lot. As always, thank you for tuning in. Remember, hit that like, share, subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to us on. Really helps us. We also appreciate the support from W Energy. Don't forget, if you're shopping for that energy, go to not.com, but w.gg. Use the code HOTLAPS at checkout. Save 10% on your order. It's hot out here. We've been loving the lemonade hydration the last couple weeks from W. It's been fantastic, but that's about it for now. It's a little later recording than we usually do, but we're going to make it through it. Appreciate it. That'll be it. Until next time, please stay safe and thank you for tuning in.